Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Joe Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Ben Jones, Product Development Specialist with Nasdaq Index Research, to introduce Nasdaq Dorsey Wright Tech Leaders Sector Indexes Performance Review with a spotlight on healthcare and industrials. Ben, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me on, Joe.
And Ben, which sectors are covered in the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright Technical Leaders Sector Indexes, and what's the methodology behind it?
Yeah, so all the major sectors are covered, right? Ranging from base materials, energy, financials, technology, you name it, the traditional sectors or industries. The one that you might see missing is real estate, but overall you're going to see kind of real estate, bolted in kind of financials. So when we look at these indexes, they're designed to provide a view of, what securities in each of these industries are really exhibiting momentum, right? That's what it's tracking. So the momentum of these industries, so to speak. So it gives you an interesting way to see the strength and leadership in different areas of the marketplace. And, these indexes that are, shown in front of you, these are all tracked by, ETFs at Invesco. Joe, the process behind these indexes is quite simple, right? So what we do is essentially take, an inventory of securities, right? So imagine just the largest 2,000 securities by market capitalization. And then we, break them down by their industry, right? And we use a liquidity filter. And ultimately, we take all those securities from each industry and we rank them by their momentum, by their relative strength, and simply allocate to the strongest securities in that industry. Each index has a minimum of at least 30. So the whole point is being able to identify the strongest securities in those respective industries, and that's the basis of the Dorsey Wright Technical Leaders Sector Index Suite.
All right, Ben, if we take a look at our third chart here, you're tracking industry momentum. You mentioned that earlier. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so if you really want to see kind of what has been working this year, take a look at these different indexes, right? Because you're able to see, those areas that have really had the wind of momentum in their sales, right? And so if we think about that, if we think about momentum and, this world that we've been living in since the COVID-19 pandemic started, it's really the market has really favored, technology and healthcare, right? And those are the securities that have been outperforming. And you can see that looking at these momentum-based indexes, right? Technology, momentum leading the charge for the year. You also see industrials quite competitive. But what's interesting, though, is that, we've seen a market favoring growth and favoring those type of industries. Since the election, we've seen somewhat of a pivot, right? We've seen those industries that have been lagging for much of the year, those value-oriented industries, the likes of, energy, for example, financials, those areas have begun to outperform. So you're beginning to see those laggards on the stock as well as the industry level begin to outperform. What's interesting, though, we haven't seen a full-blown pivot yet, where we've seen a regime change, where we've seen that move from from growth to value just yet. But we have seen a few weeks of outperformance from some of those laggard areas.
And probably will be that way until we get back to some sort of normal and get through the vaccination process. So speaking of that, Ben, let's take a look at two specific sectors, healthcare and industrials. Let's start with healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare has been a leader for much of the year. And you can see just its outperformance really going back in time, how it's been outperforming the benchmark by, nearly, 60%, looking at a healthcare technical leaders index, again, those strongest companies, securities in that industry versus just a traditional, market cap weighted healthcare benchmark. So there's been, plenty of outperformance there, plenty of momentum. We have seen it, kind of stagnate a little bit the past couple of weeks, where it hasn't participated like base materials and energy, but it has been performing well. So it's a strong trend that we see right now, and we haven't seen any signs of that changing just yet. Just looking at how this index has performed in recent weeks, and as well as going back to the last 12 months.
All right, and let's wrap up with industrials.
Yeah, industrials is one of those industries that kind of crosses both the value and growth spectrum. And it's kind of an interesting story, right? It's one of the most competitive industries from a momentum standpoint we see this year. And it's also been competitive since the presidential election, the beginning of the first week of November. So when we, pull back the curtain, so to speak, and see kind of where, this index is allocated to, what subsectors or really what companies from these subsectors are exhibiting momentum, you can see that it's oriented towards industrial machinery, building material, business support. Those have been the areas where this index, again, that owns and allocates the strongest momentum-based companies in this industry. You can see where it's underweight compared to a traditional benchmark, right? You're going to see it's underweight a lot of those areas that are labeled as, you know, consumer finance or diversified industrials, right? Think the big conglomerate industrial companies. So it's a big difference between this momentum-based index versus the traditional market cap. So this is in an interesting sweet spot, being able to, you know, adapt and change based off of, you know, changes in leadership within this area of the market. And right now it's pointing towards, you know, industrial machinery and building materials. Those are the leading subsectors in this index right now.
All right, Ben, great stuff. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you.
You got it. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.